First impressions. The alien girl Zira sat on a stone bench, arms crossed, a bored expression on her sharp, angular face. Her violet eyes scanned a large transport bay, where ships from different planets had landed. Warriors from across the galaxy moved around, their armor gleaming under the bright artificial lights. Then the human walked in. Zira's eyes widened for a second before she burst into laughter. The sound echoed in the chamber, drawing the attention of nearby warriors. Some smirked, others chuckled, but no one laughed as loudly as Zira. She leaned forward, holding her stomach. This is the human," she gasped between laughs. "They sent him to fight." Ryan Kane stood at the entrance, arms relaxed at his sides. He was tall for a human, but compared to Zira's kind, the Varen, a race of towering, battle-hardened warriors, he looked unimpressive. Zira pointed at his face. Flat nose, tiny eyes, smooth skin, no fangs, no claws. "Is this a joke?" The warriors around her laughed too. Ryan did not react. He simply tilted his head, observing Zira with calm, blue eyes. Then he smiled. "Are you done?" he asked. His voice was deep but controlled. Zira's laughter slowed. Something about his tone irritated her. He was not angry. He was not embarrassed. He was amused. She stood up, towering over him. "You do not belong here, human." She tapped her armored chest. "We are warriors, born for battle. You are," she gestured at him, "a weak species. You should leave before you get hurt." Ryan sighed. He rolled his shoulders, loosening his neck, and then smirked. "You haven't seen everything yet." Without another word, he removed his heavy jacket and let it drop to the ground. The moment his shirt came off, the laughter stopped. Zira's eyes narrowed. The warriors around her went silent. Ryan's body was covered in scars, deep, jagged, and old. His shoulders were broad, his muscles thick and battle-worn. But it wasn't his size that stunned them. It was the story his body told. The scars were not random. They were the kind only a survivor had. Knife wounds, burns, claw marks. Each one spoke of a battle fought, and won. Zira's expression changed. Ryan pointed at a scar along his ribs. "This one. Got it from a Zorvian beast, 2 meters tall, claws like swords." He touched a burn on his shoulder. "Plasma blast. That one hurt." Then he gestured to a long, deep scar across his chest, one that nearly reached his heart. "And this, a warrior thought he killed me." He smiled. He was wrong. Zira's mouth opened, but no words came out. The warriors around her stared in shock. They had mocked him, judged him, but now they saw something else. "Still think I'm weak?" Ryan asked, tilting his head. Zira clenched her fists. She had never seen a human up close before. The stories said they were fragile, easily broken. But Ryan Kane did not look broken. He looked unbreakable. She took a step closer. "You survived all this." Ryan smirked. "Humans don't die easy." For the first time, Zira felt unsure. She had laughed at him. But now she wondered, was this human more dangerous than he looked? The truth about humans. Zira couldn't stop staring. The laughter had died in her throat, replaced by a strange, unfamiliar feeling. Unease. The human, Ryan Kane, stood relaxed, his scared torso exposed for all to see. He had no armor, no natural weapons like her people. Yet the proof of his survival was written on his skin. Each scar was a mark of battle, a silent story of pain and endurance. He wasn't weak. He was something else entirely. Zira clenched her fists. Her people, the Varen, were raised to believe in strength above all. They trained from childhood, fought to prove their worth, and conquered to show dominance. Humans, they were supposed to be fragile creatures who avoided war. Yet, standing before her was a human who had faced death and lived. She took a step forward, eyes narrowing. How? Ryan raised an eyebrow. How did you survive all that? Zyra's voice was quieter now, but there was an edge to it. Ryan smiled, but there was no humor in it. You think your people are the only ones who fight. He crossed his arms, the motion making his muscles flex slightly. You think we just lie down and die. Zyra met his gaze, feeling something stir inside her, curiosity, maybe even respect. But she pushed it down. The stories say humans are soft, that your people prefer to talk instead of fight. Ryan chuckled, shaking his head. That's what everyone gets wrong about us. His blue eyes darkened. Humans don't start fights, but we finish them. Before Zyra could respond, the warning alarms blared. A deep metallic voice echoed through the ship's massive docking bay. Alert! Unknown hostiles detected. All warriors, prepare for combat. The warriors around them immediately sprang into action, grabbing weapons and heading toward the armory. Zyra turned sharply, reaching for the 2 plasma blades strapped to her back. She looked at Ryan, expecting to see him hesitate. But he didn't. Instead, he was already moving. His hands flew to his belt, drawing a sleek, black pistol with unnatural speed. Zyra barely saw him move. It was as if he had done this 1,000 times before. The ground shook violently as explosions rocked the outer hull. The lights flickered, and the deep red glow of the emergency signals bathed the bay in a chaotic, flashing hue. Zyra's earpiece crackled. Enemy boarding craft inbound. All units engage immediately. She turned to Ryan. Stay back, human. This is no place for. A deafening blast tore through the docking bay's doors before she could finish. The metal was ripped apart like paper, and a flood of black-armored figures stormed through the gaping hole. They were tall, skeletal creatures with glowing red eyes. The Draxian Raiders, feared across the galaxy for their brutal, merciless attacks. Zyra lunged forward, igniting her plasma blades with a sharp hiss. She spun, dodging a blaster shot, and sliced through the first enemy she reached. The fight had begun. The air filled with the roar of gunfire and the clash of weapons. Zyra fought like the warrior she was trained to be. Fast, strong, relentless. But even in the chaos, her sharp senses caught something unexpected. Ryan was not standing back. He was fighting. And he was winning. Zyra turned just in time to see him dodge a plasma bolt, ducking low before shooting an enemy straight in the chest. The Draxian Raider dropped instantly. Another leaped at him. Ryan twisted his body, sidestepping the attack with unnatural speed, grabbed the creature's arm, and twisted. Bone snapped. The Draxian let out a strangled screech before Ryan kicked it away, firing another shot to finish it off. Zyra froze for a brief second. What was she seeing? This was not how a weak species fought. Ryan moved like a ghost, his reflexes flawless, precise, lethal. He wasn't just fighting, he was destroying the enemy. One of the Draxians, a massive brute twice Ryan's size, charged at him with a plasma axe raised high. Zyra's instincts screamed at her to intervene. There was no way a human could handle an enemy of that size. But before she could move, Ryan stepped in, faster than she thought possible. Crack! In a blink, he had sidestepped the axe swing, grabbed the Draxian's arm, and snapped its elbow backward with brutal efficiency. The enemy screamed. Ryan didn't stop. He drove his elbow into the creature's throat, then kicked it in the chest with enough force to send it crashing into a metal crate. The moment it hit the ground, he shot it in the head. Dead. Zyra's heart pounded. This human was not normal. She had trained with the best warriors of her race, had fought in countless battles, had defeated champions twice her size. But watching Ryan Kane fight was something else entirely. He fought like someone who had lived through hell and never looked back. Zyra's breath caught as he turned to her, his pistol still raised, his expression calm but unreadable. She swallowed hard. What are you? Ryan smirked, wiping a bit of dirt from his cheek. Just a human. Battle-tested, Zira's pulse pounded in her ears. The battle around her raged on. Plasma bolts screeched through the air. Warriors clashed with brutal force, and the docking bay trembled under the relentless assault. Yet, all she could focus on was the human. Ryan Kane moved like a predator, quick, ruthless, and terrifyingly efficient. He wasn't the biggest fighter on the battlefield, nor did he have the natural weapons of a Varen warrior or the brute strength of the Draxian raiders. But he didn't need them. He used everything. His speed, his surroundings, his enemies' mistakes. Zira had fought with countless warriors, champions, warlords, assassins, but she had never seen someone fight like this. The way he moved, anticipating attacks before they came, striking with precise, lethal efficiency, it was almost unnatural. A Draxian lunged at him, razor-sharp claws slicing through the air. Ryan didn't step back, he stepped forward. He grabbed the Draxian's wrist mid-swing, and in one smooth motion, twisted and used the creature's momentum against it. Snap! The alien howled as its arm broke, and before it could recover, Ryan drove his elbow into its throat. It collapsed, gurgling. Zira barely had time to react before another enemy turned its sights on Ryan. A massive Draxian brute, standing nearly 8 feet tall, rushed at him with a plasma axe raised high. Too fast, too close, he won't make it. Zira opened her mouth to shout a warning, but Ryan was already moving. At the last second, he ducked low, narrowly avoiding the axe. The brute, unbalanced, stumbled forward. Ryan twisted behind him, grabbed his head. Crack kick. The body hit the ground. Dead. Zira inhaled sharply. No hesitation. No wasted movement. This wasn't just skill. This was experience. Zira had mocked him before, laughed at him. But now, all she could do was watch. This wasn't the fighting style of a warrior raised in the safety of an empire. This was the fighting style of someone who had been at war his entire life. Another wave of raiders stormed into the bay. Zira gritted her teeth and charged back into battle. Her plasma blades hummed as they cut through armor and flesh. The fight was brutal. Varen warriors fought in tight formations, pushing back the attackers with sheer force, while Ryan moved like a shadow, picking off targets with precision. But the enemy was relentless. Another explosion rocked the ship, and Zira's earpiece crackled to life. Command to all warriors. The Draxians have breached the reactor core. They're trying to overload it. We have less than 10 minutes before detonation. Zira's blood ran cold. If they lost the core, the entire ship, and everyone on it, would be vaporized. She spun toward Ryan. We need to move. Now. Ryan nodded. Lead the way. Zira didn't question it. She sprinted through the bay, weaving between the bodies of fallen warriors, Ryan right behind her. As they neared the reactor control room, the air grew thick with smoke. Sparks rained from the ceiling, and warning sirens wailed through the halls. They reached the entrance just as a Draxian squad emerged, blocking their path. There were 6 of them, heavily armed, heavily armored, and between them and the reactor door was a single narrow corridor, a death trap. Zira tensed, gripping her blades tighter. This is bad. The Draxians opened fire. Zira dove behind cover, her heart pounding. Plasma bolts scorched the walls, leaving glowing craters where she had stood seconds before. Then she saw Ryan. He wasn't hiding. He was running straight at them. Are you insane? Zira shouted. But Ryan was already moving. Boom! A grenade flew from his hand, exploding in the center of the Draxian squad. The blast knocked 2 of them off their feet, and before the others could recover, Ryan was on them. He slid under a Draxian's rifle, firing point-blank into its chest. Another turned to attack, but Ryan was faster. He grabbed the alien's arm, yanked it forward, and twisted, forcing the enemy to use its own body as a shield against incoming fire. Ding! Bang! 2 more raiders fell. Zira took advantage of the chaos. Leaping into the fight, her blade sliced through armor, cutting down the last enemies before they could regroup. Silence. The corridor was clear. Zira stood there, breathing hard, staring at the carnage. Ryan wiped some blood from his face, completely unfazed. She didn't know what shocked her more, the way he fought, or the fact that he looked bored. She stepped closer, searching his face for any sign of fear. There was none. "You've done this before," she said, her voice quiet. Ryan gave her a look. A tired look. "More times than I can count." Zira exhaled slowly. Then she turned toward the reactor door. "Come on. We still have a ship to save." The warrior's heart. The air inside the reactor chamber sizzled with heat. Red warning lights flashed across the curved metal walls, casting eerie shadows over the control panels. The Draxian sabotage had done its job. The reactor's core was overloading, and if they didn't stop it soon, the entire ship would be reduced to molten scrap floating in space. Zira's sharp eyes scanned the room. The reactor pulsed like a giant, angry heart, surrounded by thick cables and security consoles. Smoke curled from damaged control panels, sparking with each flicker of power loss. Her gaze snapped to Ryan Kane, the human who had shattered everything she thought she knew about his species. He stood at her side, his body streaked with sweat and grime from battle, his blue eyes calm despite the danger. Zira had never met a warrior like him. He had no claws, no natural armor, no genetic enhancements, yet he had cut through the Draxian raiders like a seasoned predator. And worse, he had made it look easy. But now wasn't the time for questions. They had a ship to save. She turned toward the reactor control panels. "We need to manually stabilize the core. The damage is too severe for the automated systems." Ryan glanced at the massive, pulsing sphere of energy. "And if we can't?" Zira didn't hesitate. "Then we die." Ryan exhaled through his nose. "Great." He moved toward the control panel, scanning the alien symbols on the screen. Zira watched him closely. He was a human, yet he didn't panic. He didn't hesitate. He faced death with the same expression he had when fighting. Calm, focused, unreadable. Her people were warriors, but even the strongest Varen felt the pressure of looming death. Did humans not fear it? Zira shook the thought away and tapped on the control panel. A warning message blinked across the screen. "Manuel override required. System locked. Safety protocol disabled. Reactor or detonation in 7:42 minutes." Her stomach tightened. 7 minutes before total destruction. "We need to reroute the coolant system and reset the core's energy output," she said. "It will buy us enough time to shut it down properly." Ryan nodded, scanning the layout. He pointed to a set of thick, rust-colored pipes running along the far wall. "Those coolant lines, can we access them?" Zira followed his gaze. "Yes, but..." She hesitated. "They're superheated. If you touch them without protective gear, you'll burn through your skin in seconds." Ryan gave her a look. "Well, that's not ideal." She smirked despite the situation. "Welcome to real combat, human." Without another word, they moved. Zira sprinted toward the emergency release valve, while Ryan approached the coolant control mechanism. Every second counted. The ship shuddered violently, throwing Zira off balance. A new alarm blared across the chamber. Boarding doors breached. Her heart sank. More enemies. And then she heard it. Metallic footsteps pounding against the floor outside the reactor room. The Draxians were coming. She shot a glance at Ryan. He had heard it too. His hand was already on his pistol. "How long until we can stabilize the core?" Zira gritted her teeth. "At least 5 minutes." Ryan's jaw tightened. He checked the ammo count on his weapon. "We don't have 5 minutes," he muttered. The reactor room's security door exploded inward. A dozen Draxian raiders stormed in. Zira spun, igniting her plasma blades. The blue energy hissed to life as she dropped into a defensive stance. But before she could react, Ryan charged forward. He moved before the enemy had even finished entering the room, using the thick metal piping as cover. A Draxian raised its weapon. Ryan fired first. Bang! A clean headshot. The alien collapsed before it could fire a shot. Zira was stunned for half a second before instincts took over. She leaped into battle, her plasma blades slicing through the first enemy in her path. Ryan fought differently than any warrior she had ever known. Most Varen fighters relied on strength, brute force, and armor. Ryan used speed, angles, and precision. He never wasted a movement. He dodged before they struck. He fired only once per target, hitting exactly where it counted. And even more shocking, he wasn't fighting to prove anything. He was fighting to win. Zira drove her blade into the chest of the last raider, panting as she turned toward the reactor. "Go!" she shouted. Ryan was already moving. 357 minutes is to detonation. He reached the coolant panel, gripping the metal release valve. His face twisted in pain as searing heat burned into his palms. Zira's breath caught. He didn't stop. She lunged forward. "You're going to." Crack! The valve snapped loose. Steam erupted from the pipes, cooling the overheated reactor. The temperature readings dropped. 215 minutes to detonation. Ryan fell backward, exhaling sharply. His hands were red, burned raw, but he barely reacted. Zira stared at him, her blade still glowing. "You're insane." Ryan pushed himself up, cradling his injured hands. "Yeah, I get that a lot." Zira clenched her jaw. She had never seen someone take pain like that and keep moving. She had spent her life fighting to be strong. But this human, he fought because he had no other choice. The reactor stabilized, and the alarm switched off. The crisis was over. For the first time, Zira felt something other than irritation toward the human. Respect. She sheathed her blades and took a slow step forward. "Your hands." Ryan shrugged. "They'll heal." Something in her chest tightened. She had never met anyone like him. A moment of silence passed. Then Ryan smirked. "So, still think humans are weak?" Zira exhaled. "No." She crossed her arms, staring at him. "You're something else entirely." The unthinkable. The reactor room was quiet now, but Zira's mind was anything but. The battle was over, the ship saved, and the Draxian raiders lay dead around them. And yet, her heart was still racing. She wasn't sure if it was from the fight, or from watching the human do the impossible. Ryan Kane stood a few steps away, his hands badly burned from the coolant valve, but his face remained calm. He barely reacted to the pain, as if it was just another part of the job. Zira had met thousands of warriors in her life. She had trained with the deadliest fighters in the galaxy. She had fought in arenas where only the strongest survived. Yet she had never seen someone like him. Humans weren't supposed to be like this. They were supposed to be fragile, soft, talkers rather than fighters. But Ryan Kane had proven every single belief she had about his kind was wrong. And that unsettled her more than she cared to admit. The aftermath. She turned away from him, her mind still spinning. The ship's emergency alarms had finally stopped, replaced by a soft hum of stabilization. The reactor core was no longer a ticking bomb, but they weren't out of danger yet. Zira tapped her comm device. "Command, reactor stabilized. The ship is secure. Send med-teams to the docking bay." A garbled voice responded. "Acknowledged. Teams en route." She exhaled. "Good." Turning back to Ryan, she gestured toward his hands. "You need medical treatment." Ryan glanced at his burned palms as if he had just noticed them. "I'll live." Zira stared at him. She couldn't decide if he was tough or just reckless. Maybe both. A tense silence stretched between them before Zira spoke again. "Why?" Ryan frowned. "Why what?" She stepped closer, searching his face. Why did you do that? She gestured toward the coolant valve. You knew the risks. You knew it would burn you. And yet you didn't hesitate. Ryan held her gaze. Because if I didn't, we'd both be dead. Zura's jaw clenched. Most warriors would have fought twice before risking themselves like that. Ryan gave her a tired smirk. I'm not most warriors. That much was clear. Zura's people fought for glory, honor, conquest. They fought to prove they were the strongest. But Ryan, he fought like someone who had no other choice. The unexpected enemy. Before Zura could press him further, her comm crackled again. Captain, new enemy signatures detected. Multiple life forms inbound. Unknown origin. Her stomach dropped. She tapped the device. Repeat that. Unknown. Yes, Captain. It's not the Draxians. We've never seen life signs like these before. And they're heading straight for your location. Zura exchanged a glance with Ryan. He raised an eyebrow. I thought we already had our near-death experience for today. Zura pulled out her plasma blades, their blue energy humming to life. Looks like the universe isn't done with us yet. Ryan flexed his fingers and reloaded his pistol with smooth precision. Then let's get to work. They moved quickly, exiting the reactor room and making their way through the damaged corridors of the ship. Sparks rained from the ceiling, and the scent of scorched metal filled the air. The med teams were nowhere in sight, probably delayed by the destruction left in the Draxians' wake. Then they heard it. A low, unnatural clicking noise. Zyra froze. Her warrior instincts went on high alert. Ryan stopped too, his expression darkening. He had heard it as well. Then came the skittering. Fast, too fast. Something was coming. Zura turned toward the nearest corridor just in time to see something large and shadowy dart between the flickering lights. Her heart slammed against her ribs. What was that? Ryan whispered. She didn't answer, because she didn't know. The Draxians were brutal, but they were predictable. They fought with tactics, strategy. This was different. This felt like a hunt. Zura tightened her grip on her blades. Stay close. Ryan nodded. He wasn't joking anymore. His body was tense, ready. Then the shadows moved again. A tall, insect-like creature emerged from the corridor. It was unlike anything Zyra had ever seen. It stood on two thick, spindly legs, its arms long and curved like scythes. Its skin was jet black, its eyes glowing with an eerie green hue. And when it opened its mouth, it let out a sound that made Zyra's blood turn cold. A hungry, clicking snarl. More shapes emerged behind it. 5. No. 6. Zyra's breathing slowed. This wasn't a fight. This was an ambush. And these creatures, they were here to feed. Ryan muttered under his breath. Well, they're ugly. The lead creature lunged. Zyra dove to the side, just as the scythe arm slashed through the air where her head had been seconds ago. Ryan fired his pistol, a perfect shot to the creature's head. But the bullet ricocheted off its armor-like skin. Not good. Zyra struck with her blades, slicing into the creature's side. The attack landed, but barely. Its skin was thick, too resistant. Another creature charged at Ryan. He dodged, but not fast enough. The thing's claw ripped across his shoulder. He grunted in pain but didn't slow down. Instead, he twisted, using the momentum to slam his elbow into the creature's neck. It stumbled, just long enough for Zyra to drive her blade into its throat. The creature let out a gurgling hiss before collapsing. One down. Too many left. Ryan stepped back, bleeding but still very much in the fight. He reloaded, his hand steady despite the pain. Zyra exhaled sharply. She had seen warriors give up from less. But Ryan? He was just getting started. Her admiration for him deepened, and she hated it. We can't win this fight head-on, she said, scanning the corridor. Ryan glanced at her, breathing hard. Then we don't. Zyra frowned. What? He smirked. We set a trap. Her eyes flickered with understanding. She had spent her life under the belief that strength was the only path to victory. But humans, they didn't just fight with strength. They fought with strategy. And suddenly, Zara wasn't so sure who the real predator was anymore. The breaking point. The corridor felt smaller now. The walls of the damaged ship seemed to close in as the monstrous creatures stalked forward, their glowing green eyes locked on Zara and Ryan. Zara had fought hundreds of battles, faced enemies twice her size, dueled champions who were stronger and faster than her. But this was different. These things, whatever they were, weren't just attacking. They were hunting. She could see it in the way they moved, their sharp, scythe-like limbs twitching in anticipation. They were patient. They weren't mindless beasts. They were waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And that terrified her. Ryan, standing beside her, reloaded his pistol with practiced ease. His shoulder still bled from where the creature had slashed him, but his face remained calm, calculating. He turned to her. "We don't fight them head-on." Zara gritted her teeth. "We don't have a choice." Ryan shook his head. "No, you don't fight predators by being stronger. You fight them by being smarter." His blue eyes scanned the battlefield like he was seeing something she wasn't. Then his gaze locked onto a set of ruptured fuel pipes overhead. Zara followed his line of sight. A plan formed in her mind instantly. Use the environment. Set the trap. Strike when they least expect it. She met Ryan's gaze and gave a small nod. For the first time, she wasn't leading the fight. For the first time, she was trusting a human to do it. The trap. Zara moved first, darting sideways, her plasma blades flashing as she slashed toward the nearest creature. It dodged easily, too easily. It wasn't falling for the obvious attack. Good. That meant it wasn't expecting what happened next. Ryan raised his pistol, aimed high, and fired into the ruptured fuel line above. Boom! Flammable vapor erupted from the cracked pipe, engulfing the creatures in a sudden white-hot inferno. The aliens screeched in unearthly pain as the fire consumed them. Their black exoskeletons burned as they writhed, their hunger replaced by agony. Zara wasted no time. She leaped forward, spinning through the air, and brought both of her blades down in a powerful strike. Two creatures fell instantly, their bodies sliced clean through. Another tried to retreat, but Ryan was already on it. He lunged, grabbing the creature's still burning body, and with a grunt of effort, slammed it against the wall so hard that its brittle exoskeleton shattered. Zara turned, breathing heavily, eyes scanning for more threats. But there were none. The last of the creatures collapsed, smoldering. And just like that, the fight was over. The cost of victory. Zara exhaled sharply, stepping over the charred remains. The corridor still smelled of burning flesh, but she barely noticed. She turned to Ryan. That was reckless. Ryan smirked, brushing soot from his face. Worked, didn't it? She scowled, but she couldn't argue. He had read the battlefield faster than she had. He had seen the opportunity, the weakness in their enemies, and he had turned it against them. Zara had always believed the strongest fighter won. But Ryan had proven something she didn't want to admit. The smartest fighter was even deadlier. Her gaze flickered to his injured shoulder. Blood seeped through his torn sleeve, darkening the fabric. She frowned. "You're still bleeding." Ryan glanced down at his wound, shrugging. "Yeah, well, not the first time." Zara stared at him. Not the first time. The way he said it, so casually, like this was normal for him. Like he had lived his entire life in war. A flicker of something unfamiliar passed through her chest. She had spent her entire life proving she was strong. But Ryan, he had spent his life surviving. That was a different kind of strength, and it was one she had never respected. Until now. She exhaled and reached into her belt pouch, pulling out a small vial of healing serum. "Here," she muttered, tossing it to him. Ryan caught it in one hand, blinking. "You're actually helping me." Zara rolled her eyes. "Don't get used to it." Ryan chuckled but didn't argue. As he applied the serum to his wound, Zyra turned away, her mind still racing. She had never respected humans before today. Now she was starting to question everything she had been taught. And that scared her more than any battle ever had. The silent moment. For a few moments, they stood in silence. The ship was quiet. The battle was over. But Zyra felt off balance. She had faced death countless times. She had stood in the arena, fought in wars, led her people into battle. But this was the first time she had fought beside someone she didn't fully understand. And worse, she wanted to understand him. She turned back to Rian, watching as he stretched his injured arm, testing its movement. His blue eyes met hers, sharp but unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, Zyra broke the silence. "I was wrong about you." Rian raised an eyebrow. "That's a big admission." She scowled. "Don't make me regret it." Rian smirked but didn't push. Instead, he just nodded. "You weren't the first to underestimate humans. You won't be the last." Zyra exhaled, crossing her arms. "Maybe. But I won't be making that mistake again." She turned and started walking. "Come on, human. We're not done yet." Rian followed, his smirk still lingering. But as they walked, Zyra couldn't ignore the truth nagging at the back of her mind. She had spent her life fighting for respect, for honor, for strength. But today, she had fought beside a human. And somehow, that meant more than any victory she had ever won. More than just a human. The ship's corridors stretched ahead, lined with flickering emergency lights. Smoke clung to the air, carrying the sharp scent of burning metal and blood. The battle was over. The Draxians were dead. The unknown creatures lay in scorched ruins. But Zyra knew something was different now. She had spent her life fighting for honor, strength, and dominance. Every battle had been about proving herself, proving that she was better. But this battle, it had changed something inside her. She stole a glance at Rian Kane, the human who had shattered everything she believed about his kind. He walked beside her, his burned hand still raw but steady. His wounded shoulder barely seemed to slow him down. He moved like a man who had suffered more than he would ever admit. She had fought beside many warriors, but she had never fought beside someone like him. And that unsettled her more than any battle ever had. The return to command. The ship's command center was still in chaos when they arrived. Officers ran between control panels, shouting status reports. The overhead displays showed damage reports, casualty lists, and emergency alerts. As soon as Zyra stepped inside, all eyes turned to her. She ignored them. She was used to people watching her, expecting her to lead. But this time, she felt different. Her second in command, Commander Vash, approached, his red armor stained with battle. He gave her a brief nod. "The reactor is stable. The ship is holding. We lost a third of our crew." His voice was grim. Zyra nodded. "And the Draxian flagship? Destroyed." A small note of satisfaction in his voice. "They won't be raiding anyone else." She exhaled. At least that was done. Then Vash's gaze flickered to Rian, his brow furrowed, his expression unreadable. "And the human." Zyra stiffened. She recognized that tone, the same tone she had used before today, before she had seen Rian fight, before she had seen what a human was truly capable of. She lifted her chin. "Rian Kane fought beside us. He helped save this ship." Vash raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "A human. Against the Draxians." Rian smirked slightly. "You should see the ones I left behind." Zyra caught the flicker of amusement in Vash's eyes, but he masked it quickly. "Even so, I would not have expected one of his kind to." "Don't make that mistake." Zyra's voice cut through the room like a blade. The command crew stiffened, surprised. Even Rian looked at her with mild curiosity. Zyra took a slow step forward, locking eyes with Vash. "I made the same mistake. I won't make it again." She turned to the rest of the command crew. None of us will. The room was silent. Zira wasn't sure why she felt the need to say it. Maybe because she had spent her life believing humans were weak. Maybe because she had mocked Ryan the first time she saw him. Or maybe because, deep down, she knew she owed him more than just respect. Ryan exhaled, breaking the silence. Well, this was touching and all, but if you don't mind, I'd like to not bleed to death. Zira rolled her eyes. The moment was gone. Take him to the med bay, she ordered. Vash hesitated, then nodded. 2 guards stepped forward to escort Ryan, but before they could, he raised a hand. I can walk. Zira smirked despite herself. Of course he could. The conversation that changed everything. A few hours later, Zira found herself standing outside the med bay. She had no idea why. Ryan's injuries weren't life-threatening. He had survived worse. She should be focusing on her crew, the mission, the next battle. And yet, she was here. She stepped inside. Ryan sat on the edge of the medical cot, rolling his shoulder as the advanced healing serum worked its magic. His wounds had already started closing, though his hands were still wrapped in thin bandages. He looked up as she approached. Couldn't stay away. She crossed her arms. I wanted to make sure you didn't die before I had a chance to beat you in a real fight. Ryan grinned. You'd lose. Zira narrowed her eyes. You're lucky you're injured. He leaned back slightly. You're lucky I am. Silence. And then, laughter. Zira blinked, realizing she was laughing. It wasn't forced. It wasn't sarcastic. It was real. When was the last time she had laughed like that? Ryan's smirk softened. You know, he said, his voice quieter now, I wasn't sure if you'd make it back. Zira tilted her head. Neither was I. She meant it. For the first time in a long time, she had doubted herself. Not because she wasn't strong enough, but because this battle hadn't been about strength. It had been about trust. And that trust had been placed in a human. She stepped closer. Back on the battlefield. You fought like someone who has lost a lot. Ryan's smirk faded slightly. His blue eyes flickered with something old, something painful. She had seen that look before, in the eyes of warriors who had survived wars that cost them everything. I've lost enough, Ryan said finally. Zira didn't press. She understood. She let out a breath, nodding toward the exit. We'll be docking soon. You'll be given quarters on my ship. Temporary. Of course. Ryan arched an eyebrow. Is that an invitation? She smirked. It's a warning. Ryan chuckled. Fair enough. She turned to leave, but before she reached the door, Ryan spoke again. You're not as terrifying as you pretend to be. Zira stopped. Slowly, she looked over her shoulder. And you're not as weak as I thought you were. Ryan grinned. So we're making progress. She shook her head but couldn't hide the slight smile on her lips. As she stepped through the door, she realized something. For the first time in her life, she wasn't walking away from a battle alone. She had started this journey thinking humans were weak. Now she wasn't sure if she had ever met anyone stronger. Final hook. As the ship prepared for docking, Zira stood at the command deck, looking at the stars. And for the first time, she wasn't just thinking about war. She was thinking about a human. And she had no idea what that meant.